The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden hues over the neatly manicured lawns of Oakridge Estates, a quiet suburban neighborhood where life was supposed to be simple. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind that begged for an ice-cold beer and the sizzle of a grill. That's exactly what Mike Reynolds had planned. He had invited a few friends over, set up his backyard with fold-out chairs, a cooler packed with drinks, and a small Bluetooth speaker playing classic rock at a reasonable volume. The aroma of seasoned burgers filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of freshly cut grass. It was the picture of relaxed suburban bliss. But across the street, peering through lace curtains with the intensity of a predator hunting its prey, was Karen Whitmore, self-appointed enforcer of Oakridge's HOA and a woman who prided herself on her unwavering dedication to community standards. Karen had been watching since the first guest arrived, her lips pursed as she jotted notes in the little black book she used to document perceived violations. Her issue today? Alcohol. Karen's personal vendetta against alcohol was well known. She had tried and failed to push a community-wide ban before, citing a vague claim about preserving the wholesome environment of Oakridge Estates. The other board members had humored her with polite nods but ultimately dismissed her concerns as unnecessary. Still, Karen remained vigilant, waiting for a moment to pounce. And today she saw her chance. Mike was mid-laugh, flipping a perfectly seared patty, when a sharp voice cut through the warm air. "Excuse me." The group turned. Standing just outside Mike's fence was Karen, arms crossed, her ever-present clipboard tucked under one arm. She wore a pastel blouse that matched the color of her home, an intentional choice to emphasize the neighborhood's unified aesthetic. Her expression was tight, disapproving, the kind of look she probably practiced in the mirror. Mike sighed. "Hi, Karen. Lovely evening, isn't it?" Karen ignored the pleasantry, her gaze zeroing in on the beer bottle in his hand. "Alcohol is strictly prohibited on HOA property. You need to put that away immediately." The group exchanged glances, stifling laughter. Mike took a leisurely sip before responding. "Well, good news, Karen. My backyard isn't HOA property. It's mine. Bought and paid for." Karen's left eye twitched. "You are within the HOA jurisdiction, and that means the rules apply to you. Public intoxication is a serious matter, and I won't have this kind of reckless behavior in our community." Mike glanced at his small gathering. His guests, adults, most of them professionals, were casually enjoying drinks, not exactly riotous degenerates threatening suburban peace. "Karen, we're not in public. This is private property. And unless I missed a memo, the Constitution still applies here." Her nostrils flared. "I will not stand by and watch this neighborhood be turned into some frat house. Then go home." The words, so simple yet so effective, sent Karen reeling. She sputtered for a moment before straightening her spine. "I will not be ignored. If you refuse to abide by the rules, I'll be forced to take further action." Mike sighed, shaking his head as he turned back to the grill. "Do what you gotta do, Karen. I'm not breaking any laws." Karen spun on her heel, her expression dark with determination. She stormed away, heels clicking angrily against the pavement. Mike thought that was the end of it. He was wrong. 15 minutes later, just as he was passing out freshly grilled burgers, the sound of sirens filled the air. A police cruiser rolled up to the curb, its lights flashing but siren off, signaling that this was not an emergency, at least, not by normal standards. Mike exhaled through his nose. "Oh, for the love of..." Two officers stepped out, both looking like men who had better things to do. "Sir, we received a call about a disturbance involving alcohol and disorderly conduct." Karen reappeared from her front porch like a vulture, descending on a fresh carcass. "Officers, thank goodness. This has been going on all afternoon. Public drunkenness, loud music, and absolute disregard for community safety." One of the officers glanced over at the scene, a few guys standing around a grill, a couple sitting on lawn chairs chatting, music playing softly in the background. "Uh-huh," he said flatly. Mike, arms crossed, gave him a knowing smile. "Gentlemen, I think we all know what's going on here. We're having a backyard barbecue on private property. No laws are being broken." Karen gasped. "They have open alcohol containers in public view. That's dangerous. There are children in this neighborhood." The second officer turned toward her. "Ma'am, you called 911 for a couple guys drinking beer in their own yard?" Karen bristled. "This is an HOA-controlled community. We have standards." The first officer sighed, rubbing his temples. Ma'am, this is the third time this month we've responded to one of your concerns. You are dangerously close to being cited for misuse of emergency services. Karen's face blanched. But they're breaking the rules. The officer gave her a tired look. Rules aren't laws. And even if they were, this is private property. If you call us again for something like this, we will fine you. Do I make myself clear? Karen opened and closed her mouth like a fish gasping for air. She had no argument. With no other option, she stormed away, her indignation radiating like a heat wave. The officers turned back to Mike. Sorry about that. Enjoy your evening. As the police car pulled away, Mike raised his bottle in a mock toast. To Karen, may she forever find new and creative ways to waste taxpayer money. The group erupted in laughter. But Karen, she wasn't done. The next morning, an email circulated from the HOA board with an urgent message. Proposal: a ban on alcohol consumption in all HOA properties, including private backyards. Mike read it twice, then burst out laughing. Oh, so that's how she wanted to play this. Fine. Mike sent out a mass invitation to the entire neighborhood for a weekly beer tasting event. Not only would he be drinking beer in his backyard, he was going to make it a local tradition. And as for the HOA vote, let's just say the overwhelming majority of homeowners shut Karen's proposal down. The final straw came when local brewers began sponsoring the events, setting up beer tastings that boosted community engagement and brought neighbors together in ways Karen's suffocating rules never had. Humiliated, Karen quit the HOA in dramatic fashion, calling the residents a bunch of degenerates. And Mike? He fired up the grill, cracked open a beer, and toasted to victory. The weeks following Karen's humiliating exit from the HOA were among the most peaceful that Oakridge Estates had experienced in years. Without her constant surveillance, neighbors felt liberated, as if an oppressive fog had lifted. The weekly beer tasting events had grown beyond what Mike had initially imagined. What had started as a small act of defiance had transformed into a full-blown neighborhood tradition. Families gathered, people swapped stories, and new friendships were forged over cold drinks and grilled steaks. Even former HOA board members, who had once supported Karen's strict policies out of obligation or fear, started attending, realizing just how much more alive the neighborhood felt without her hovering presence. Yet, despite Karen's dramatic resignation email, there was one last twist in the saga, one that no one saw coming. It started with an anonymous complaint. Mike first heard about it when his mailbox overflowed with HOA violation notices one morning. He frowned, flipping through them as he stood in his driveway. The same charge was listed on nearly every letter. Unauthorized commercial activity, violation of HOA bylaws, fines pending. Mike blinked. Commercial activity? He turned to his neighbor Jeff, who had also received a stack of identical violation notices. What the hell is this? Mike muttered. Jeff shook his head. They're claiming the beer tastings count as business operations because we have vendors present. Mike let out a short laugh. Vendors? You mean when Dave from down the street set up a folding table and handed out free samples of his homebrewed stout? Jeff nodded grimly. Yeah, and Lisa's food truck. That's listed too. Even though she parked it in my driveway last week, and we all just ate for fun. Mike ran a hand down his face, exhaling. This has Karen's fingerprints all over it. Even though she had quit the HOA, she still had connections. Enough to pull strings, whisper complaints into the right ears, and weaponize the bureaucracy one last time. But Mike wasn't about to let this stand. Fighting back and taking it further. Instead of simply ignoring the fines, which was tempting, Mike decided to take it further. He went straight to the HOA board meeting, bringing dozens of neighbors with him. The room was packed, and for the first time in years, the board members looked nervous. Without Karen's iron grip, they were left defenseless against real questions. Mike stood and held up the violation notices for all to see. I'm going to say this once, he said, his voice calm but firm. This is not a commercial event. No one is making money. No one is selling anything. This is a private gathering on private property. One of the board members, a timid man named Roger, cleared his throat. Mike, we received some complaints that... Mike cut him off. From who? Roger. Karen. The room shifted. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. Roger didn't deny it. The real issue, Mike continued, is that these events have brought people together in a way the HOA never could. Instead of policing each other, we're building a community. And if that makes some people uncomfortable, then maybe we should be questioning why the HOA still exists. A wave of murmurs passed through the room, and that was when Lisa stood up. I second that, she said. We don't need an HOA dictating how we live. In fact, I'd like to propose something, a vote to dissolve the HOA entirely. Silence. Then a single voice in the back of the room muttered, "Hell yes," followed by another, and another. And then, applause. The final vote, ending the HOA for good. Over the next few weeks, discussions exploded. The idea of eliminating the HOA had been a fantasy for years, but now it was possible. With Karen gone, people started reevaluating what the HOA had actually done for them. And the more they thought about it, the clearer it became. The fines were excessive. The rules were arbitrary. The benefits were non-existent. When the final vote was held, the outcome was decisive. 89% of homeowners voted to dissolve the HOA. The moment the results were read aloud, cheers erupted. Some people popped open beers right there in the community center, toasting to their newfound freedom. Mike stood beside Lisa, a grin splitting his face. Guess this means the weekly BBQs are here to stay. Lisa laughed. Hell, we might as well make it official. And that's how the Oakridge Estates Community Cookout was born, a tradition that would replace the HOA for good. No more fines. No more Karen. Just good food, good company, and a neighborhood that actually cared about each other. Karen's final meltdown, a last desperate attempt at control. But, of course, Karen wasn't done. A week after the vote, an email went out to the neighborhood. From Karen Whitmore. Subject: The Shameful Fall of Oakridge Estates. It was a full-page manifesto, claiming that the community had descended into lawlessness, that she refused to live amongst such degeneracy, and that she would be putting her house on the market immediately. Her closing statement: This neighborhood is doomed without proper leadership. I only hope that, one day, you all come to your senses. Nobody replied. Nobody cared. And within a month, Karen was gone. Her house sat on the market for months, because even realtors had heard of her reputation. When it finally sold, it was to a young couple who loved the idea of a no-HOA community. And just like that, Oakridge Estates was truly free. The legacy: how BBQ changed everything. Years later, Mike would still laugh about how all of this started. One small barbecue. One Karen tantrum. And now, a self-run, HOA-free neighborhood where people actually wanted to live. What started as a backyard gathering became the foundation of a stronger, happier community. No rules. No unnecessary fines. Just people taking care of their homes because they wanted to, not because they were threatened. Mike flipped a burger on the grill, looking around at the packed backyard. You realize you started a movement, right? Lisa teased. Mike smirked. Hey, I just wanted a beer in peace. She laughed. And now we all get to. And as the smell of grilled food filled the air, Mike raised a cold one to his friends and neighbors, knowing that they had one. For good. The months after the HOA's dissolution were nothing short of revolutionary for Oakridge Estates. Without a micromanaging board dictating every aspect of daily life, the neighborhood began thriving in ways no one expected. Gone were the days of ridiculous fines, unnecessary restrictions, and power-hungry rule enforcers. In their place, a self-sustaining community that actually functioned better without the HOA's interference. Yet, while most of the residents embraced their newfound freedom, there was one person who could not let go: Karen. Though she had publicly declared her disgust with the community and announced her intent to move, there was one small issue. Nobody wanted to buy her house. Karen had spent years terrorizing her neighbors, wielding her authority like a weapon. Every realtor who set foot inside her home soon discovered that her reputation preceded her. Potential buyers would schedule a tour, only to be met with stories from locals eager to warn them. Oh, you're looking at Karen's place? Let me tell you about the time she called the cops on kids for drawing with sidewalk chalk. Or, she once fined a guy for having a potted plant on his porch. Or the infamous: she tried to ban Christmas lights because she claimed they disrupted the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. The buyers would leave shaking their heads, and another for sale sign would sit untouched. Karen was stuck, trapped in the very place she once ruled with an iron fist. Only now she had zero power. And she hated it. Karen's new mission, reclaiming control at any cost. Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat. If she couldn't rule through the HO, she would find another way. And so a new strategy began: petty sabotage. Trash mysteriously dumped in front yards. Anonymous complaints filed with the city about unlicensed events, aka the community BBQs. Snide letters slipped into mailboxes, urging residents to bring back structure to the neighborhood. Each attempt was more desperate than the last. Her worst mistake, however, messing with the BBQs again. The night Karen went too far. One Friday evening, as the neighborhood gathered for another weekly cookout, Karen snapped. Unable to sit in her house and fume any longer, she marched across the street, her face red with anger, her phone clenched tightly in her hand. Mike saw her coming from a mile away. "Oh, here we go," he muttered. Karen pushed through the gathering crowd, her eyes darting around for any excuse to cause trouble. "This is a disgrace," she hissed, pointing at the coolers filled with beer. "You people are turning this neighborhood into a drunken wasteland." No one responded. They just stared at her, amused, waiting to see what ridiculous thing she would do next. Karen, taking their silence as an invitation to escalate, whipped out her phone. "I've already reported this to the city council," she announced. "You'll be hearing from them soon." Mike chuckled. "Karen, for the last time, we're not breaking any laws." Karen's lip curled. "Not yet. But when I'm done, you will be." She turned to Lisa, who'd been grilling steaks nearby. "You used to be respectable, Lisa. A retired teacher, for God's sake. And now you're out here encouraging this delinquency." Lisa smiled, unfazed. "Karen, if you don't like it, you can go back inside." Karen scoffed. "I shouldn't have to hide in my own home while this circus goes on outside." Mike sighed, stepping forward. "Karen, let me make something very clear. You don't get to control this neighborhood anymore. The OA is dead. Your reign is over. And if you don't like how things are, you have two choices: stay and deal with it or leave." Karen's hand shook with rage. "You're all a bunch of degenerate," she spat. With that, she turned on her heel and stormed back to her house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Everyone just shrugged and went back to their food. Karen's final attempt at revenge and her ultimate downfall. The next morning, Mike was woken up by a loud knock at his door. He groaned, rolling over. "If that's Karen, I swear to." But when he opened the door, it wasn't Karen. It was a city official, and he was holding a formal complaint. "Mr. Reynolds," the man said, adjusting his glasses, "we received multiple reports of illegal alcohol distribution and unlicensed public gatherings at your residence." Mike exhaled sharply. "Let me guess. Karen." The official hesitated. "We can't disclose the complainant." Mike smirked. "You don't have to." The official glanced at the barbecue setup in the backyard, at the neatly kept lawn, at the perfectly normal-looking suburban setting, and sighed. "Look, I don't see an issue here. But since we got a formal complaint, I have to follow protocol." He handed Mike the document. "Just let me know if you need anything. This isn't the first complaint we've had from her." Mike grinned. "Oh, I know." As soon as the official left, Mike gathered the community leaders: Lisa, Jeff, Jim, and a few others. "That's it," Mike said. "She wants to play dirty? Let's play." The final move, forcing Karen out for good. The neighborhood had tolerated Karen for years, but this was the last straw. So they flipped the script. Every single homeowner filed noise complaints against her. They reported her for harassment. They contacted her realtor and made sure every prospective buyer knew her history. Within a week, Karen received more official notices than she had ever issued in her entire life. And finally, she broke. One morning, a moving truck appeared in front of Karen's house. No goodbyes, no farewell emails, just a for sale sign and a silent departure. By sunset, she was gone. For real this time. Oakridge Estates, finally free. With Karen out of the picture, Oakridge Estates flourished like never before. The BBQs continued, growing into a full-scale tradition. The neighborhood was happier, more connected, and best of all, free from the toxic HOA mentality. One afternoon, as Mike stood by the grill, Lisa handed him a beer. "Well," she said, Looks like we finally did it. Mike raised his bottle. To the A of free life. Lisa smirked. And to never hearing the words Karen in the same sentence ever again. They clinked bottles, smiling as the sound of laughter and music filled the air. For the first time in years, Oakridge Estates felt like a real home. And or Karen would ever take that away again. The first Karen-free summer in Oakridge Estates was the best one yet. The BBQs had grown into something even bigger than Mike had anticipated. What had started as a small act of defiance had now turned into a full-fledged community event. Every Saturday, families gathered under string lights, children ran barefoot through the grass, and old neighbors who had barely spoken before now laughed and swapped stories like lifelong friends. The atmosphere had completely shifted. Without Karen's constant policing, without the HOA's endless micromanagement, people began rediscovering the joy of simply being neighbors. But there was one last thing that would truly solidify the change, a final, undeniable symbol that Oakridge Estates was no longer bound by its past. And it came in the form of a single, defiant paint job. The Blue House breaking the last HOA rule. It started with Jim Dawson, the retired Marine who had quietly endured years of HOA harassment. His crime? His house had been painted a shade of blue that wasn't approved. Karen had fought tooth and nail to fine him into submission, even threatening legal action at one point. Jim, a stubborn old soldier, had refused to back down. But now there was no HOA, no enforcement committee, no Karen with her clipboard. So one morning, without asking permission, Jim walked outside, paintbrush in hand, and began repainting his house an even brighter shade of blue. Neighbors stopped and watched. Mike was the first to break the silence. "You're really doing it, huh?" Jim grinned. "Damn right. Always wanted it this shade. This HOA made my life hell over this stupid color." "Not anymore." Lisa smirked. "They said it didn't fit the neighborhood aesthetic." Jim stepped back, admiring his work. "Well, the neighborhood changed. And then, a domino effect. One by one, other homeowners started making the changes they had always wanted but had been too afraid to do under the HOA's rule. Jeff painted his shutters a deep red. Lisa added a colorful mural to her backyard fence. Mike, grinning like a madman, repainted his front door neon green just because he could. The old HOA-approved beige uniformity was gone. In its place, a colorful, lively, unapologetically unique community. And the best part, it felt more like home than ever before. Karen's last, desperate attempt to intervene. But of course, Karen wasn't done. Even though she had moved away, she still had one last pathetic trick up her sleeve. One evening, as Jim was putting the finishing touches on his blue house, a white sedan pulled up across the street. And out stepped Karen. The moment her high heels hit the pavement, the entire block seemed to pause. People exchanged knowing looks, watching silently as she marched toward Jim's driveway. Jim didn't even acknowledge her presence. Karen cleared her throat dramatically. "I hope you're aware," she said, voice laced with condescension, "that this color is highly inappropriate for a neighborhood of this caliber." Jim, without missing a beat, dipped his brush into the bright blue paint, turned to Karen, and flicked a single drop onto her pristine white shoe. "Whoops." Karen gasped as if she had been stabbed in the chest. Her eye twitched. "That was intentional." Jim smirked. "You got proof." She opened her mouth, then snapped it shut. "No HOA. No rules. No." Karen backed authority. She had nothing. Mike stepped forward, arms crossed. "Didn't you move?" Karen's lips pursed into a thin line. "I still have friends in this neighborhood," she said stiffly. "And I'm here to tell you that you're all making a terrible mistake." Lisa, leaning against the fence, raised an eyebrow. "Because we're happy. Because you're turning this place into a disaster." Karen snapped. "Property values will plummet, crime will rise, and soon you'll all be begging for structure again." She huffed, waiting for a response. But no one said a word. They just stared at her bored, as if she was nothing more than an inconvenient fly buzzing around. That was when it hit her. No one was afraid of her anymore. No one cared about what she had to say. And that was worse than any HOA power she had lost. With a final dramatic scoff, Karen turned on her heel, stormed back to her car, and sped away for good. And just like that, she was finally gone. For real this time. The final celebration, the first annual Oakridge Block Party. Karen's official demise called for something big. So Mike, Lisa, Jim, and the rest of the neighborhood went all out. The usual Saturday barbecue? Not enough. This time, they organized an entire block party. Food trucks lined the street. Live music played from a local band. Kids ran through sprinklers, painting sidewalks with chalk, free from HOA rules. The entire neighborhood came together, celebrating their freedom from Karen and the HOA. At the center of it all, Jim's bright blue house, standing tall, a symbol of everything they had fought for. As the sun set, Mike stood on a chair, raising a beer. To Oakridge Estates, to freedom, and to never dealing with a dam again. The crowd erupted into cheers. Neighbors hugged, laughed, and toasted to their new, free lives. And in that moment, for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like a real community. No rules, no power-hungry enforcers, no one telling them how to live their lives. Just good people living freely the way they were always meant to. And that was better than any HOA could ever provide. The Oakridge Estates block party wasn't just a celebration, it was a declaration. A statement to the world, to themselves, and especially to Karen that the HOA was never coming back. The neighborhood had finally taken control of its own future, and nothing, not the ghost of HOA regulations, not Karen's delusional return visits, not the occasional petty sabotage was going to change that. But even though most of the neighborhood had embraced this newfound freedom, there were still a few holdouts, people who had been deeply conditioned by years of HOA rule. And now, without Karen at the helm, they were lost. This, of course, was Karen's final legacy, the last remnants of her influence still clinging to a small handful of neighbors who didn't know how to function without someone dictating their every move. And one of them was about to become a problem. The last Karen standing, a desperate attempt to regain order. Karen may have left Oakridge Estates, but her most loyal follower had not. Her name was Phyllis Carter, a woman in her late 60s who had served as Karen's right-hand enforcer during her HOA reign. Phyllis had always been a background figure, quietly issuing anonymous complaints, gossiping at board meetings, and sending out passive-aggressive emails disguised as friendly neighborhood reminders. But with Karen gone, Phyllis had a choice to make: fade into irrelevance, or step up to take Karen's place. She chose the latter. At first, it was small things. Muttering disapprovingly at the block party, shaking her head at the kids running through the sprinklers, sending out an email to the neighborhood about maintaining the integrity of Oakridge Estates, which no one acknowledged, grumbling about the degradation of the neighborhood to anyone who would listen. But when that didn't work, she escalated. The return of anonymous complaints. Mike was in the middle of mowing his lawn when Jeff approached him, holding up a stack of papers. "Got another one," Jeff said, rolling his eyes. Mike shut off the mower and wiped the sweat from his forehead. "Let me guess, an anonymous complaint?" Jeff nodded. "This one says my grass is too tall." Mike snorted. "Tall? Jeff, you have the best-kept lawn on the block." "Yeah, well, apparently it's unsightly and damaging the overall property values of the community." Mike took the letter and skimmed it quickly. Same passive-aggressive tone. Same formal, overly dramatic wording. "Oh, come on," Mike muttered. "This is straight out of Karen's playbook." "Yep," Jeff said. "And it's not just me. Lisa got one for her unapproved garden modifications. Jim got one for his excessive use of exterior color." Mike grinned. "Jim's blue house is getting complaints? I'm shocked." Jeff smirked. "I know, right? But the point is, someone's trying to enforce rules that don't exist anymore." Mike exhaled. "Let me guess, Phyllis." Bingo. A failed attempt at an HOA revival. Phyllis, desperate to restore order, had been trying to recruit a new group of neighbors to reform the HOA. She started hosting secret meetings, inviting the few people who still missed the structure of the old HOA. People like Dale and Margaret Owens, an elderly couple who had once served on the original board. Tracy Evans, who had enjoyed HOA-backed power trips over minor infractions. A few newcomers who hadn't lived through Karen's tyranny and thought a small wouldn't be so bad. Her goal? To quietly rebuild the HOA under a new name, one that didn't sound as threatening. Something like the Oakridge Neighborhood Standards Committee, which, of course, was just another HOA in disguise. And when word got out, the neighborhood lost its collective mind. The community's final stand, the HOA ban. Mike wasn't about to let history repeat itself. He, Lisa, Jim, and the rest of the anti-HOA residents immediately organized a meeting, this time a public one. A meeting to discuss an official, legally binding measure. A permanent ban on any future HOA formation in Oakridge Estates. Because the truth was, as long as it was legally possible for an HOA to be reestablished, there would always be someone trying to make it happen. And Phyllis was that someone. When the meeting started, she tried to fight it. She argued that HOAs protect property values. She claimed that structure is necessary for a civilized community. She insisted that most people in the neighborhood wanted the HOA back. That was when Lisa stood up and gestured to the packed room. Then why are we all here? Phyllis's face flushed. She had no answer. Because the truth was, the vast majority of Oakridge Estates had moved on. They didn't want an HOA. They didn't need an HOA. And now, they were about to make damn sure one never came back. The final vote, the death of HOAs in Oakridge Estates. Over the next few weeks, the residents worked with a lawyer to draft a legally binding amendment to the neighborhood's governing documents. A permanent ban on the creation of any HOA, past, present, or future. The vote was held. And the result? 94% of the community voted in favor. It was official. Oakridge Estates was now legally HOA-proof. There would be no revivals, no secret committees, no way for Phyllis or anyone like her to bring it back. It was over. For good. Phyllis's embarrassing exit. Once Phyllis lost, she had two options. Accept defeat and live peacefully among her neighbors. Throw a tantrum and leave. She chose option 2. Within a week, her house was on the market. And as she packed her bags, she sent out one final email, filled with the same dramatic, doomsday and nonsense Karen had written before her. Without structure, this neighborhood will crumble. I give it 2 years before you all come crawling back. Nobody replied. Nobody cared. And within a month, Phyllis was gone. For good. The final chapter, a free neighborhood at last. With Phyllis and Karen gone, the era of HOA rule in Oakridge Estates was officially over. The BBQs continued. The neighborhood flourished. And best of all, nobody was fined for having the wrong shade of shutters ever again. One evening, as Mike stood on his porch, beer in hand, Lisa walked up beside him. So, she said, smiling, did we just kill an HOA permanently? Mike took a sip, grinning. Looks that way. And as laughter and music filled the air, Mike knew, without a doubt, that they had won. And they would never let an HOA rule their lives again.